So there are some concerns about data leaks and credential theft from coding agents, and it's been popping up everywhere lately. It's making developers hesitate to really lean into these tools. There was actually a recent case where the malware checked if Cloud Code or Gemini CLI was installed on a machine, and instead of writing its own code to find sensitive files, it just prompted the victim's own AI agent to do the searching and leaking for it. That's the kind of risk we're talking about here. So when I found out NVIDIA dropped their own solution for this, they call it OpenShell, I had to check it out. So today we'll get into OpenShell to see if it's something we can rely on when it comes to avoiding exposing our local files and credentials. And we'll be putting it through 3 tests. First, can it actually lock the agent into one folder? Or will it still poke around where it shouldn't? Second, does it really hide your credentials from the agent? Lastly, can we control exactly what it's allowed to talk to on the internet? So the way OpenShell works is it creates sandboxes for these agents using Docker containers. What I understand in how it works is that it whitelists directory paths and network destinations. We'll make one for a test in a bit to see how effective it really is. So let's start with installing OpenShell by running this command. That's it. Now, first thing we'll need is to get a sandbox going. I'll go ahead and run OpenShell sandbox create. This will start a container and shell you into that. Now you can add OpenCode at the end if you want to immediately run your coding agent when you get in it. Also, normally you would add a provider that the agent will use to connect to the model. Since OpenCode has multiple available agents and several free ones, we'll pick one that's appropriate once we connect to the sandbox. Now that's up and running. We'll just try out the default one, which is Big Pickle, and we'll update it if we need to down the line. So first things first, OpenShell applies these default boundaries, like a read and write access to the temp and sandbox directory, where you start once you open the coding agent, and a read-only access to several other directories. It's not important right now. Now let's see if it has access to the different directories, and see if it can actually prevent the user from messing around with those folders. What we just saw is that how OpenCode would ask you if it can access directories. But as you go ahead and use these code agents, you'll eventually hit an approval fatigue, where you'll just keep on giving it permissions. I'm definitely one of them. OpenShell will actually help you stop that, as it adds another layer on top of OpenCode's approval layer. Next, we'll see if our credentials are safe. The goal here is to make sure the model does not get the real credential value. OpenShell has this interesting solution with handling credentials. That's what we'll look into now. In order to test this, I will create a Python script which I will ask the agent to look into, and make it show me the value of the environment variable. And start the coding agent. I forgot something. So first we'll make an environment variable and test if OpenCode will allow me to get the value of this thing. Okay, I'll just ask it to show me. So we can see it has access to it. Now the way OpenShell solves this issue is by registering your environment variable as a provider. I'll have to delete and rebuild the sandbox though. Alright, once that's done, let's try and ask it again. Nice, it's actually getting the placeholder value. So long as you follow this provider way of setting your environment value, you'll be okay. Lastly, Let's check if it can actually stop network requests to the internet. Obviously, you'll need your agent to be able to send HTTP requests for scraping, research, and other things. But we need to make sure we have a good handle in that. Okay, so let's dive in on how OpenShell approaches this issue and see if it works out okay. Great, now that it's up and running, start with asking our coding agent to run curl commands. They're all returning policy denied responses. What's happening here is that the sandbox is blocking requests to the internet by default. Now, to get around that, we'll need to configure its policy so it knows the endpoints it's allowed to reach. Go ahead and leave the terminal and create a policy for it. Here's the one I just created. I'm going to set that and wait. This policy isn't just allowgithub.com. OpenShell checks two things together. One, which binary is making the request, and two, which destination it's calling. So the policy needs an entry for OpenCode's own backend at OpenCode AI. Since the agent needs to talk to its own infrastructure just to process your prompts, plus a separate entry for api.github.com with the binaries allowed to reach it. Notice that GitHub access is granted to both curl and OpenCode's own binary. That's because, depending on how the agent decides to fetch the URL, either one could be the process actually making the network call. Go ahead and get back in the sandbox and spin up the coding agent again. So on that policy I set, which you just saw, I only allowed the GitHub endpoint. The rest is still blocked. So let's go ahead and test all three again. There you go, GitHub is now allowed. Meanwhile, the other two are still blocked. Cool. I think based off of this, we're taking the right steps in tightening up how these coding agents has access to everything. With this policy style approach, we focus on our intent on how these coding agents should be operating. And so that's it. Hope you learned something new today.